are live with a capital L, IVE.
Yep.
Watch us like
Hmm.
TV.
Hmm. Nice, nice. It is a poetry podcast. This is First Take. My name's Justin.
I'm
This guy
James.
is James.
I'm James the Saturn Warrior.
Yeah,
You know.
nice. And
and
I don't have a nickname like that, but we could probably give one to John Keats,
John
who's
Keats is he's the warrior of love.
the warrior of love. Okay, nice. Yeah, yeah. So that's who in honor of John Keats is this episode, actually. In his
he
honor. That's why we're doing it.
I may have spoke too soon. I don't know if he's necessarily a warrior. He might be more
Mm,
like a
mm,
he's more like a he's the one crying for love. He's the advocate of love. He
mm,
cries for
mm.
it. He
A
he
bit,
sh-
yeah, yeah.
he shouts
But
for
he
it.
he was known as a little bit of maybe a fighter in his youth. He wasn't
Mm,
he wasn't a bookish youth from what I've read.
okay.
Yeah.
Was he was known for bouts of fisticuffs?
Apparently he fought for his friends. He was
Okay. He fought for
he
those he cared for.
it was maybe a bit argumentative,
Okay.
but that just could be because he's a Scorpio. I'm not sure.
Okay. I think just past Scorpio season. Not to
Hmm.
date the
Hmm.
podcast. Not to date the
Right.
podcast. But John Keats. He also lost a battle with tuberculosis
Yeah.
at a very
You're right.
young
Yeah.
age. He was
A
only
fighter,
20.
but a loser ultimately.
But
Yeah.
yet
Yeah.
his poetry lived on.
Hmm. Hmm.
Sometimes
Right.
decades after his ultimate demise. But he did
Yeah.
die at the age of, I think, 25.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Didn't quite make it to 26.
Okay, okay. So we almost have a death of the young artist or
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
young athlete. There's
Right, right,
the
right.
famous
Yeah.
poet the
He Hausman.
death. Yeah,
Hmm.
death of the young athlete. I think.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, he's very much the it's potential that we mourn because even though his poems weren't really well regarded, during while he was alive, and that's not uncommon. But looking back, it's his letters even that make him an even sort of greater sort of literary figure or sort of poetic genius of sorts, based on what he wrote about poetry in his letters, and not quite sometimes close to being seen in his actual poetry, but not quite realized in his poetry. So it's sort of like that death of the athlete. It's the potential that we, with John Keats, that sort of captivates us.
Would and you would say his I mean some of his letters kind of capture maybe the spirit of romanticism, some of the things that he hoped to do and hoped to accomplish in his letters, like his
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know, and
his
I think one letter he lamented, and similarly, and a bit of foreshadowing the poem that I'll do, but he lamented at one point that I guess that his own death seemingly imminent. He
hmm. Hmm.
wished he had almost more time to write, to sort of flesh out
Right, right, yeah.
his thoughts, sort of
Hmm.
engage with beauty.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And and but there's also something odd of how he sort of frames beauty as almost sort of like an earthly thing,
Mm,
something that he will be missing out on upon his death.
yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, right. There's almost maybe a sort of an atheistic tone in some of the
Mm,
romantics,
mm,
in the later romantics. Um, you know, William Wordsworth is much more on the uh, kind of Christian, you know, um, where like Byron, Shelley, Keats, they're sort of a tad bit atheistic, and maybe that's kind of what that's alluding to.
Mm,
That beauty being something that can only be experienced in life, sort of almost saying that there is an end to life, saying that consciousness ends with death, and instead of saying that rather that maybe there'd be more beauty later, which might be kind of more of a Christian idea of like sort of idea of heaven,
mm,
that later I'll see true beauty. That would
right.
be that would kind of be a different perspective. Yeah.
I also see, in his poetry, this idea of life as almost an opportunity to engage with beauty, to
Mm,
sort of
mm,
engage with
hmm.
truth. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's truth and beauty. It's also kind of like a classical idea, which
mhm,
is interesting because he had Keats has he was like one of my favorites early, like just out of college. Like I loved John Keats. I hadn't read him in some time, and I hadn't really read a ton about him. So like more recent, like this last week, I've been reading like about him and
mhm,
more in depth than I had before. And um, it's kind of funny that he sort of has these like classical sort of ideas and themes in his work, and I never quite I guess I didn't quite realize, during his time, people, saw him as sort of like this like uneducated, sort of like part of like this like Cockney, sort of, he's a Cockney poet. And like the way that he had, sort of almost like he had like this like imposter syndrome, using some of these like classical allusions like to um like just classical like Greek literature and mythology. And so, but what's kind of interesting is even though, say that, maybe that's true, like he didn't come from this great, sort of like educational background, or he wasn't, he was of like a working class, per se. Um, he still is, one that sort of embodies some of those classical or like, sort of Greek ideals, like with, you know, truth equaling beauty, to your point. And in his poetry, I think he kind of strives towards that, towards that beauty um, more than most, and so now his poetry can kind of seem like a little, it's not as like maybe it's not like it's like good, but it's not like as intellectually like maybe say stimulating as some of the other poets we've read recently, where like
mm,
you can really dive deep into some of their stuff. Where he's more about like it's like love poetry, It's like it's
yeah.
just beautiful,
I
It's just
think
admiring
lyric
beauty.
poetry,
Yeah, lyric poetry. Yeah.
as they call it, a lot of sonnets,
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
lot of iambic pentameter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, well, very well done, beautifully done. Nothing to sort of, nothing to sort of, sneeze at. I would think, but also it may seem a bit old fashioned, especially
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in light of I guess you could call it our sort of postmodern moment or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, or even this moment where in the age of information where we have like so much poetry available to us, maybe some of his poems may seem a bit quaint.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but very, 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 very beautiful. I find his poetry to be beautiful. I find John Keats to be one who, who sort of advocates for like truth, beauty, love, calls out for it.
Mm-hmm.
Views his poetry as a means to it, a means of appreciating it, and sort of a way to, to sort of maybe, and even though there is a bit of that atheistic quality, via beauty, via truth, via beauty, especially, we find a transcendence in John Keats' poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, there is sort of a, transcendent quality. You have the uh, romantics, that it sort of in America, it took on like the transcendentalists.
Mm,
Um, those are kind of, they you have like the romantics, the transcendentalists. He obviously was over in London at
mm,
the time, and sort of like with those late romantics, like I said, with like uh, Shelley and
uh, I can't
Lord
think.
Byron. And they kind of, because like the early romantics too, like Wordsworth, like you think of guys that are going, it's like more about, yeah, it's like that pastoral sort of bucolic kind of
Mm,
poetry, um, more of sort of out like, sort of romanticizing, nature and kind of the country life. But Keats was like more of a city guy,
mm,
and we'll see in my poem too, like he like references places in the city, and um, I read this like, sort of criticism at the time that he was, someone who wrote of like the nightingale kind of like from a not from a place of like knowing, like he never like really actually heard the song of a nightingale.
mm,
um because he was someone who was born and lived in the city, so he kind of was like more writing about like the idea of it, rather than like from the perspective of someone hearing it. So um in some ways, yeah, he's inspired by the romantics, but kind of maybe a bit of an imposter in some ways,
mm. I mean, he was so young. I wonder if, when you're 24, 25, especially in the, back then. I mean, maybe, mimicry is kind of all you had for a little bit. I mean,
Hmm.
who knows what it
Yeah,
would have,
yeah,
like we said, we mourn his potential. Who knows what would have
right,
happened with John Keats in his
right,
40s or
right.
50s.
Yeah, because he did write like prolifically, you know during the time he was alive. It's interesting too because he spent a lot of time, kind of doing other things. He started to become a doctor, and
Right, right, right.
got his like apothecary license, or like was able to, practice as an apothecary. So, um,
I
but he
think
chose to be a poet.
I think someone said that he was like even too sensitive to be a doctor. Like his
Mm,
he wasn't that good of a doctor because he was a bit too empathetic with his patients.
yeah, there was something there where like
He almost
there's
didn't
even
have the
like
fortitude for it.
right, right, yeah, he had some kind of like moment where like cutting into somebody, or witnessing it and seeing that he didn't quite have the stomach for it. He felt like he himself was being cut. I think there is
Right,
some
right.
kind of like sort of maybe ecstatic moment that he experienced. The kind of a little bit of a legend has it.
Right, right, right. A bit of an apocryphal story, if nothing else.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? I didn't realize this until like within the last week. He was only 5 feet tall.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Isn't that like just like a weird, just like factoid?
It sort of is, and I know
Yeah.
people probably weren't like that tall back then, but still,
Right. But still, 5 feet is that's still pretty short.
right? He's just a short, sensitive guy.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
Mm. Well,
It's
that that's
it's just
that's
that
humorous. I didn't know that.
yeah, it's just like a weird little. I just can't get it. I saw that like on the Wikipedia, and then I actually read a really funny article in like maybe like the Stanford School newspaper. It was like it was like a humor piece about John Keats being like a terrible wingman because like he's stealing all the girls, and it like mentions him being like under 5 feet tall with like a with like this angelic face.
Hey,
So yeah,
maybe.
it's funny. Yeah.
Hey, man, he certainly had a way with words. So
Right, right. Yeah.
maybe
Hey.
but yeah, died young. So we have somebody who apparently not only did he have a short life, but was also kind of short in stature. And
Mm.
was also sort of
Yeah.
I guess sort of a maybe a sensitive kind of guy, maybe a sensitive kind of overly emotional individual.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, that's the thing too with the romantics is like kind of, even though we talk about classical illusions, and referencing classical work, he is also, they're kind of part of, making a poetry that was sort of, like humanistic,
Mm,
and so, about sort of like emotion and love and like sort of human sort of subjectivity.
mm.
So I mean, it's kind of part of their movement. But yeah, I mean, I guess perhaps he was a little sensitive little guy.
A little sweetheart. He's this little sweetheart
Yeah,
of a guy.
yeah, yeah. He's
But
sweet.
I
He's
mean,
just a little. He's a little sweet guy.
hey, I guess this episode we sort of just jumped right into it.
And we did.
But why not? You say never leave a woman waiting.
But I mean, really, it's really telling of John Keats because you could say, in his life he really just kind of jumped right into it.
He definitely did. He jumped right in and wrote himself right into the English canon.
Right.
So I think I went. Who did I go first last time? I don't even
You
know.
did.
Okay, so do you want to go first, Justin?
Uh-uh. No,
Okay,
I'm kidding.
I'll
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and go. I'll bite
No,
the
I'll go
bullet.
first. No, 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 no,
Okay.
please. All right, so without further ado, as we do each week, folks, we each bring a poem, and I have Modern Love by John Keats. And big shout out to Poetry Foundation once again. But Modern Love. And what is love? It is a doll dressed up for idleness to cosset, nurse, and dandle. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Cosset? Cosse?
Maybe
Yeah, I'm
Cosset.
not sure. I'm not sure. I actually looked up this word, and but I didn't even pay attention to the
Oh, it's
pronunciation. I'm gonna start over. I'm gonna say
okay.
cosset.
Okay.
And what is love? It is a doll dressed up for idleness to cosset, nurse, and dandle. A thing of soft misnomers, so divine that silly youth doth think to make itself divine by loving, and so goes on yawning and doting a whole summer long, till Mrs. Combe is made a pearl tiara, and common Wellingtons turn Romeo boots. Then Cleopatra lives at number 7, and Antony resides in Brunswick Square. Fools! If some passions high have warmed the world, if queens and soldiers have played deep for hearts, it is no reason why such agonies should be more common than the growth of weeds. Fools! Make me whole again that weighty pearl the Queen of Egypt melted, and I'll say that ye may love in spite of beaver hats.
Interesting. Not quite a
Yeah, so
sonnet.
right, yeah. Yeah, he wrote like many sort of odes, sonnets, sort of
Hmm.
on, particular subjects. He would kind of like, it'd be like to sleep or, to
Right.
melancholy, um, you know, ode on a Grecian urn. Um, that's something he was kind of I don't know, he's kind of great at doing that. He could write a sonnet really quickly. He could kind of he could pick his subject and sort of, just write something on it. Which I mean, you see poets still doing that today, but maybe not with the kind of intensity that Keats has. Um, and this is on modern love. So, modern love, and what's funny is that, this is pre-modernity. Um,
Right.
but modern love is as far as meaning contemporary. Um, he's saying this is a poem that we could see, today. You probably see someone, write a Twitter post, or Facebook post or something like that, and could basically give the same sort of, message that this poem does. So modern love as contemporary love is like, and what is love? It is a doll dressed up for idleness to cosset, nurse, and dandle. What is love? What is love today? It's this doll, it's this, make believe thing, that we dress up, for idleness to cosset meaning to like baby or
Right, right.
it means like to treat with excessive indulgence, to coddle, to pamper. So, love is this thing for us to, baby, pamper, nurse, and to dandle, dandle meaning to like, when you like shake a baby up and down, like kind of
Mm-hmm.
like happy or like, bounce it on your knee or not shake it, but
Right, right.
bounce it up and down. Um, that's dandling it, so we kind of have this idea of sort of love. It's kind of, he's saying like, love nowadays is it's this immature kind of thing, make believe thing for us to dress up and and to coddle and to pamper. um a thing of soft misnomers, misnomers, that's like, a mistake, that's a mistake by calling something the wrong name or an inappropriate name,
Right.
we're almost, maybe even perhaps out of ignorance, this
Mm,
love, we give it a soft misnomers, these, kind of soft, maybe, going along with that idea of pampering it and coddling it, these, uh, yeah, I think he's saying, love isn't quite maybe this, and we, again, we could say this, the same for today, he could be talking about pop songs, or
right.
like, movies of the past, Casablanca or something, I don't know, where he's
Soft
like,
misnomers, I think of,
uh-huh,
sweet, sweet nothings. Like,
sweet nothings, yeah, that's a good one,
I
yeah,
think of,
yeah,
just sort of how, especially when people first start dating, they'll tell each other
mhm.
they're anything. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah, yeah. You're my everything. You're my
Right,
you know, I missed you before I met you.
right.
And or even just, calling something soft misnomers, maybe perhaps, he could even be talking about sort of like lust or uh, where we call these things love that aren't quite that, like these little
Mm,
feelings, these infatuations, and we say, "Oh, yes, that is love."
right,
And it's, we're misnaming this thing,
right,
um so divine that silly youth doth think to make itself divine by loving. um
right.
and, and love is like that, love is, we say we fall in love. um
You will
you
think
know
that somebody should love you just because you love them. You know?
there's that as well. And but we also feel like in loving another, we, um in those moments, like say like when we're teenagers, we're young teenagers, we're in love, like we're close to God in that moment,
Mm,
like,
right,
and that I think that, what he's saying here too, so, that love itself is so divine that silly youth doth think to make itself divine by loving. In our youth, we think that by loving something, we ourselves are getting sort of closer to God, perhaps.
right. Like
um,
the love gives us access to a realm beyond.
Yeah,
Because we're
yeah,
in
there's,
love,
yeah. Mhm,
we're somehow
mhm.
higher, somehow
Yeah, yeah.
we're more
Yeah, you could,
correct.
yeah, 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 you could see that, yeah. Where, yeah, maybe you look and you say, "Oh, mom and dad, I know I've been there. You don't know what
Mm-hmm.
love is.
Right,
I know what love is." Um, or like maybe even a friend, say that you're like, "Oh, you don't know what love is. You don't, I have
right,
seen, I have seen love. I have gone to this, to this place." Um,
like Moses on top of a mountain or
Mm-hmm.
something,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
where
perhaps. Yeah, yeah,
by
yeah. Yep.
loving we're exalted.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, he's a silly youth, you know. Again, this is something that could be being said today, you know. This is
Right.
very much like almost a contemporary sentiment, you know. Um, and and so goes on yawning and doting a whole summer long, you know, sort of this, you know, kind of I think of the yawning and the doting, obviously like doting, like, you know, kind of being sort of like adoring, this yawning. I kind of see that as perhaps like, maybe kind of yawning, sleeping this whole summer long, how you kind of go into this like, I don't know, like there's like maybe like a love slumber or something like that, like where you kind of you fall into this like love daydream, you kind of, you have like this it's like this dream-like kind of state, you're not really, you don't really do anything. That's where I kind of read the yawning in,
I even think
and
of
that,
yawning as just even talking about it a lot,
yeah, maybe yawning, yeah, maybe that is, yeah, so goes on yawning and doting a whole summer long.
like a
Um,
honeymoon phase, you know.
yeah, right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
This and it's interesting.
Mm-hmm,
Summer, honey, moon.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know,
Yep,
that's
yep.
that's
Till
that's.
Mrs.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and then contrast that also with pearl. Pearls are also sort of under the water and clams, but that's a little bit of a deeper connection right
Right,
there.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 'cause till Mrs. Combe is made a pearl tiara, and then also in Common Wellington's turn to Romeo boots, right? So the Mrs. Combe, right, there's these two lines are kind of um, it's like mirror images of each other, where
Mm-hmm.
it's that it's like a feminine and a masculine. So the Mrs. Combe is made a pearl tiara. It's like this common thing. This common thing is turned into, a pearl tiara. You could kind of go with a more, I guess, esoteric or, maybe a cult reading of it and saying, even with the misses, that pearl under the sea, something,
Mm-hmm.
you know, maybe even chaos, this sort of, feminine energy, the common Wellington, you know. I had to look into the boots a little bit. Common Wellingtons, that's a style of boots. They're the precursor of the modern rubber boot. They were
Mm-hmm.
made famous by Arthur Wellesley Wellington, who wore them in battle. I think the Battle of Waterloo, maybe 1815. But that's who they're named after. It's a they come from the Hessian boot, and those Romeo boots being kind of like that kind of Romeo boot now is like a kind of a low cut boot that come from the crummy boots of loggers. But I'm thinking that's a little bit more recent. The Romeo boot probably then he's probably referring to something like these fine Italian shoes of the time. So,
Right.
but in both instances, we're taking things that are common, the Wellington, the Mrs. Combe, and turning them into things that are beyond, that take on a certain quality, sort of beyond what they have, Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we're seeing like common everyday events turn into becoming something more through like this love, right? Um, then then Cleopatra lives at number 7 and Antony resides in Brunswick Square. These are places in London, and these are also just like common addresses, right? We're going
Mm-hmm.
to kind of William Shakespeare, which was, this is early 19th century. He's William Shakespeare's even in the past, right? But these would have been well-known stories for them at the time, just as, like, and they're like tragedies. He's talking about Cleopatra. Antony and Cleopatra, Romeo and Juliet. These are tragedies. These are when love is like, it's this, dramatic. over dramatic thing. It's life and death in both these stories. The love drives them to suicide. Both couples.
Almost
Um,
like love is liquor or the spirit or
yeah,
something like
yeah, yeah.
into love as intoxicant.
Yeah, yep. And then, fools, if some passions high have warmed the world, if queens and soldiers have played deep for hearts, it is no reason why such agonies should be more common than the growth of weeds. You know, yes. So maybe there have been passions that have been um, that have almost like kind of shaped the world through the heat of these passions, like Antony and Cleopatra's shapes the modern world, because then it leads to Octavius becoming the first Roman emperor. um but uh, you know and it's no reason why such agonies, this drama, this over it's no more common than the growth of weeds. These are just normal, this love, this passion. It's just it's sort of human nature almost. That's what I'm kind of getting from these lines.
Mm,
He's saying, like, there's nothing. This isn't necessarily, maybe it is divine because it is human nature, but there's nothing necessarily so great about this.
right.
This it should be, there's no reason why it should be more common than the growth of weeds. Instead of turning the Mrs. Combe to Pearl Tiara and the Wellington to Romeo boots, maybe he's turning the Pearl Tiaras and the Romeo boots to the Mrs. Combe and the Wellingtons, the common Wellingtons.
Mm,
Um, Fools, make me whole again that weighty pearl, the Queen of England, the Queen of Egypt melted, and I'll say that ye may love in spite of beaver hats. Um, you know, make me whole again that weighty pearl, the Queen of Egypt melted, you know, and I'll say that ye may love in spite of beaver hats. Again, these things that the pearl. We were just talking about, you could say, something coming from, the ocean, the sea, the clam, this, um,
valuable
maybe
thing.
take, yeah, yeah, yes, valuable thing, the Queen of Egypt melted, right? Like she didn't value it,
Mm,
right? Um, and she's kind of the queen of, the Queen of Egypt, sort of, she has, everything sort of at her fingertips, you know, and then, but I'll say that ye may love in spite of beaver hats, these sort of common, maybe vulgar things. Um, Even with the vulgar hats, you may not have the pearls, of the Queen of Egypt that she didn't even care for. She, cast the pearls, to swine. Um, Even with your sort of beaver hats, you can still, love. Um, you don't have to have the Romeo boots. You don't have to have the pearl tiara.
right.
They don't have to reach such heights in order for it to be, sort of real love. Um, so I think that, this poem is kind of a, it's like a commentary on, like maybe the dating scene of the day,
Mm,
which a lot of the romantic poets, kind of commented on sort of sexual matters. Um, so yeah, yeah. What do you think?
I think so. I think there's I think it's definitely commenting on, maybe the spirit of the day. Thing love sort of is framed as sort of something that especially seems like he's going at the youth, and he was actually young, so maybe his generation, maybe they think love is something that they nurse, something that they just sort of fancy themselves with, daydream about. um he doesn't, he kind of frames love as something like a doll, maybe something that children play with and that they
hmm
sort of dote over throughout the summer. Before we go into his comparisons with other literature and history, just going to start there. So, love is something that is dressed like a doll, something that you might give soft little baby names to. Um, I guess he's framing it as something sort of frivolous, something that you would dote over a whole summer long. So if that's what he's sort of critiquing, what kind of love would he prefer? One that was maybe more active, one that maybe what put its money where its mouth is, maybe was more serious, committed, sort of thinking of the future, I guess.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, or maybe a little bit more pragmatic. Because I could
Mm,
see even like a modern, like a contemporary person being like, love is not the Notebook. Like some guys saying like,
right.
it's not the Notebook. It's not
Chick flick
you know,
or
yeah, something,
Friday night
something like that.
movie.
Like, right. That's what he's kind of like, with him, sort of alluding to, Antony and Cleopatra and Romeo and Juliet. I think that, he's kind of, sort of calling out these sort of maybe idealized, uh,
Mm,
versions of love that are kind of shaping people's perception of how they should be in love. And he's saying like,
mm,
hey, it doesn't have to be all that. It doesn't have to be that dramatic and over the top. Like, you know, like
right.
yeah, I don't know, maybe it doesn't have to be dramatic to be love, but maybe, our love is dramatic just by its very nature.
Or maybe we don't have to sort of dress it up, you know.
Right, yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
when
yeah.
maybe when the girl down the street becomes, the queen of the world and this and that, that's almost the same as a young child dressing up a doll. Like
Mhm.
maybe he's saying that the people we're in relationships with are real people with flaws. They're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
dolls that you just play with. They're
hmm
not
hmm hmm
you
Right,
know the people that we're in relationships with. They're not,
right,
it's not they're not Antony and Cleopatra in a play for that we go watch
right,
on Friday
right,
night.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where you might have like certain conceptions, like, oh, my husband does this, or my wife, you know,
Right.
I've always, my wife, I can't picture my wife doing this, or, I can't picture my husband being, this kind of person. I've always imagined I was going to marry this kind of guy.
Mm,
It's always going to be, Antony and Cleopatra, like, well, he's not, is he Antony? Oh, I can't be Cleopatra.
mm.
I can't be Juliet if he's not Romeo.
But also, yeah, but he's also saying like, yeah, that's not like a doll for you to play with, um
Yeah.
but he's also saying like, if you could make whole again that weighty pearl the queen of Egypt melted. It's almost like he's saying if we could like retract all of these romantic stories with these high passionate themes, then if that could be retracted, he'll say that we could love in spite of beaver hats.
Mm, yeah, maybe.
In
Yeah.
spite of our sort of, a beaver, even though it's on our head, the beaver
Yeah,
is
yeah,
kind of
perhaps. Yeah, yeah.
sort of a bottom feeding thing. Um, sort of
Yeah, I can
beavers
see
here
that.
with
Yeah.
down it's like, because the queen of Egypt melting a pearl. Have you ever heard a story about that?
No, I don't know that story.
Yeah, it sounds like he's does. I mean, unless if it is a real story, then I'm just out of the loop. But if it's
hmm
not a real story, then he's just saying like, these passions are said to have heat. There's like a
hmm
heat
Right.
to these
hmm
sort of passions, and these passions that melt the weighty pearl, the queen of Egypt, her passions melting the pearl is almost like the type of story these are affecting everybody. How these stories affect people. And he's saying if the genie could almost be put back in the bottle, maybe then I'll think that people could love each other for their lowly selves. But
Mm,
because of these sort of high passions,
yeah, yeah,
we sort of, it's almost like he wants to have his cake and eat it too in some ways,
yeah,
because
yeah.
he's almost saying that love is real, but but
Hmm.
we have to but true love is almost in the faults that we true love is almost in the things that might be faults or might be considered lowly. We have to learn to appreciate that, whereas sort of these high passions that we kind of use to transform our boredom, they maybe we could transform, our love can transform if it's focused sort of in the right way, you know
Mm,
if we could only focus our love in the right way, it can transform for real. But these high passions are just sort of, they're sort of the errands of fools,
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
and
I
it's
think
odd
that's pretty good.
because some romantics, they just by them loving and being in love, they think that's enough to transform.
Right,
here
right, right.
here
Yep.
Keats is saying, like, no, in order for the transformation, you have to love the things that actually make the person a real person, and not some action figure in your mind, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think that is a good good description of it. He's calling for a more sort of mature, understanding of love. With this.
For
Um,
sure.
he's seeing that, you know, eh, and that's why I kind of think of this poem as, even having kind of a contemporary sentiment, like we still have the same sentiment, right? We're
Mm,
still calling out for, you'll see it all the time, like guys, and it doesn't matter what medium, you know, it could be in movies, it could be in music, it could be, just on social media, people saying like, hey, we gotta, you know, I don't know, maybe at all times we have guys saying, hey, like let's stop thinking, like we have these pieces from the past that, sort of paint this picture of love that then make us all want to try and maybe not all of us, but many of us try to emulate those. And then all the time we have people saying like, hey, that's not quite what it is, we,
mm.
it's it's not the letter of the law, it's the spirit,
I think it could apply to our day. In our day, we do have different sort of vocab words. Like in our day and
Hmm.
age, there's the idea of the soulmate, and people
Hmm.
think like,
Hmm.
oh, my soulmate, or this person's made for me, or there's some sort of
Right.
higher power involved in
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
love process. And
Right.
there's a bit of that here where even though there's a and love does have transformative powers and these transcendent abilities, but here, people that sort of fancy their love as almost like extensions of their own sense of adventure, maybe, or they use
Yeah,
love as
yeah,
like a sense of, like, love is not a way to sort of aggrandize yourself, you know
yeah, yeah. Or
um
it's like how they like touch divinity, it's like,
right.
it's like based on, your love is based on like your relationship with divinity, essentially.
Right. And and if we could sort of put the genie back in the bottle, I would say that you could love in spite of beaver hats. But
Hmm.
you're not loving in spite of, you're like ignoring the beaver hat. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
you're turning Wellingtons into Romeo boots
Yeah, yeah.
out of a sense of, sort of your head filled with movies, or now we'd say
Hmm.
Disney
Hmm.
Channel or something
Yeah,
like that.
right. Yeah, or Hallmark, or it's like this.
Right.
It's this kind of like idealism, kind of trying to bring it back to realism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that's what it's like. It's kind of fighting against a certain kind of idealism, and I think today we kind of do this thing with kind of like popular psychology, and like positive psychology, and where we have like there's sort of ideal attachment styles, and we kind of have like these ideal relationships, like healthy, or a healthy relationship, like the right way to meet people or something like that, like you know
Mm-hmm.
most people are meeting on dating apps, but they want to be like, well, let's just tell everyone we met at the grocery store, um
Mm-hmm.
it's like these sort of like we say these kind of like lies almost to try and fit this ideal standard, um and we're almost unable to like love the truth,
Mm-hmm.
just like like the beaver hats,
Right.
um, we're kind of unable to love you know the the common Wellington, you know he should be wearing Romeo boots, we have sort of these high images in
Or
our mind.
out of my need to sort of, out of my boredom, or out of my sort of sense of myself, I'm going to dress this individual up until they are wearing Romeo boots. They may as well have on Romeo boots.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, the knight in shining armor. um
Right.
And I feel like some of this is kind of leaning more toward, and maybe because John Keats being a guy, he might be, I don't know if he's criticizing women here or being critical of
Mm-hmm.
women, but I feel like many of our kind of things like knight in shining armor, we're kind of going back to that. I guess like maybe like from the male perspective might be like, I don't know, maybe the girl next door or something like that. Like where we
Right.
have like this idealized version of a woman, but
Oh,
you know,
the male side of that, I think they call that the Madonna whore complex.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
the whore versus the virgin. Like,
Right, right, right.
so
Yeah, that's what I think the girl next door probably fits into that.
right,
She's
yeah.
kind of, oftentimes the girl next door scene is kind of like innocent, like it's like when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about like a girl next door, it's not like the same archetype as like the head cheerleader or something like that.
Right, right,
That it's yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. So um
Yeah, man. Hey, that was a
yeah,
solid
hey,
poem, man. And it was
yeah,
not
yeah,
quite.
modern love.
Was it in iambic pentameter? Was it?
To
Not
be honest with
quite.
you, I didn't check that. I think a
Mm,
lot of what he wrote was in iambic pentameter. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I think they were iams largely, but I didn't actually specifically count to look and see
okay.
if it was
Oh,
pentameter.
and did you want to read it once more, post
Mm,
analysis? Post
sure. Yeah, let's do
analysis.
it.
Okay. Yeah. So go read it once more to sort of go ahead and close it on up.
Okay. And after this, and this is the final time that I'll read it.
Well, only
I just want to
twice.
make that sure. It's just this is the last time,
You would keep reading it if I asked you to read it
right? But no, but I'm calling it. So, Modern Love by John Keats. And what is love? It is a doll dressed up for idleness to cosset, nurse, and dandle, a thing of soft misnomers, so divine that silly youth doth think to make itself divine by loving, and so goes on yawning and doting a whole summer long, till Mrs. Combe is made a pearl tiara, and common Wellingtons turn Romeo boots. Then Cleopatra lives at number 7, and Antony resides in Brunswick Square. Fools! If some passions high have warmed the world, If queens and soldiers have played deep for hearts, it is no reason why such agonies should be more common than the growth of weeds. Fools, make me whole again that weighty pearl the Queen of Egypt melted, and I'll say that ye may love in spite of beaver hats. Even though, you don't quite, I don't quite, the language is different. It doesn't quite translate one to one, to contemporary English. I feel like you can tell sort of the note, the tone of it and the ending. There's a little bit of biting, uh, sort of wit.
Mm-hmm. I think I think it would behoove a modern audience to read read the poem as and hear it at the same time.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think because you definitely want to read this one. I had to read the poem that I'm going to do a couple times,
Hmm.
and I even read it out loud. But the poem I chose to do is it's a poem that I sort of resonate a lot with. When I have fears
Yeah,
that I may cease to be.
yeah.
And
This,
it's interesting. This is also sort of modern, getting into
hmm
some postmodern kind of sentimentality here.
yeah. This was
Maybe
this was this was my favorite poem, or probably it is,
really.
from Keats. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, wow. We didn't
Yep.
we and full disclosure, we do not discuss the poetry before
Yep.
we
Yep.
go over it. So hey, interesting that this is
Yep.
your favorite one by Keats. It
Hmm.
was the one that kind of spoke to me.
Hmm. Yeah. I had a book, and I gave it to someone who, it's gone now, years ago. But it was a book of seven, modern, and seven. What was it? It wasn't. It was like seven modern and seven something poets. It was like, I forget the term that it used, but one of them was Keats. It had this poem in it. They had like 10 poems from Keats, and this was like a poem that I just like went back to over and over again. I loved it.
Mm. All right, well, without further ado, I shall
Do it.
read it. When I have fears that I may cease to be, by John Keats. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high pilot books and charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain, when I behold upon the night starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and I think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance, and when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. So,
Mm.
man, this is a sentiment that I have felt before, and this is a sentiment that I have used to characterize my artistry since I was a child. Um, I have always said that when I'm I also play guitar. Full disclosure, people that don't know, when I write songs or when I write poetry or anything, I always characterize it as almost like bringing my imagination to earth. Like I have a desire to sort of bring my imagination to earth, and the poet sort of expresses the same thing in this poem. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain. I too have desire to bring sort of, for my pen or my guitar or my whatever, to sort of get out everything that's in my imagination. And over the years I've piled up notebooks on notebooks and guitars and different scraps of little paper, and they pile up almost like grain. um and I go, and trust me, over the years I go back and sift through them and maybe mill this one down into corn, mill this one down into bread, or I sort of enjoy sort of going back over the works I've accumulated over the years, and obviously how many poems have I written about the night sky and the sky and the stars, and you know uh you and you think that it would be such a tragedy to die before the hand of chance, or you can sort of trace out reality with sort of the eye of an artist. And I don't know, even women, even if women, they sometimes can seem to come and go by the hour. There's some sort of power of love, even though the last poem we did, it sort of undercut love in some ways, but it also gave it a bit of a way out towards the end. But now we're back in full effect here, because love definitely has a fairy power, and love is also described here as being unreflecting. So maybe love that is fully in the moment, love that is fully in the flow state, um, that maybe it all ends up in nothingness anyway. When you stand alone and think in the when you stand alone and think in the face of it. So this is a poem about artistry itself in a lot of ways. I mean, and where we end up as artists, and what we attempt to do, and what we maybe accomplish and maybe not accomplish, and how much it matters in the grand scheme of things anyway. This is a poet. This is a poet's poem right here, man. I like the poem a lot. I definitely like it a
Hmm.
lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of speaks to a lot of, it is sort of kind of, I guess, maybe contemporary. It speaks to, I think, people today, and maybe in many times, because it's kind of it's sort of egocentric in a way, with the
Mm-hmm.
I have fears I may cease to be before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain. He's like, I have all these ideas, and I'm like, there are times when he's afraid that, like, I may never be able to get all these ideas out,
Right.
into these, high piled books of character, and hold, like, rich garners the full ripened grain. Like, I want to see my ideas sprout, and be, like, I have, like, the seeds of ideas in my mind, and I want to see them bloom, into books, into you
Mm-hmm.
know uh um, into actual, like, works of art. And looking out on the sky, and seeing the product of this high romance, this sort of, you think again of, like, creation, and almost, like, this high romance. It's like, um you kind of think of, sort of romance as being, and, like, kind of love as, it's interesting too, as being sort of, what is the impetus for, like, creation, love, romantic
Mm.
love. It's also interesting looking at, like, Eastern philosophy, where you have in the second chakra is both the chakra of sex and, the creative power, creative energy, or force. And so you think of that too through, uh, maybe the creative act is, and maybe sex is the creative act, right? That, like that's where we actually create something. That's where we actually produce something.
Mm.
Um, you know, uh, yes, and so it's kind of interesting. Thinking that this sort of, the stars, this sort of high romance, you see the creation of it, and thinking, like, will my works stack up? Could they ever to this?
Mm.
And maybe not. And kind of maybe even being confronted with your mortality, and fearing that you'll never be able to trace the, you know,
right.
trace their
Not
shadows, you know?
never live to trace their shadows
Right, yeah.
with the
You know, through the
magic
hand
hand
of
too.
chance, you know?
Mm,
If
you
I could
know,
even be so lucky.
right. And this is another example of life as an opportunity to experience beauty
Mm-hmm.
and you
Yeah,
know
yeah, yep.
and it's almost like he speaks to his muse here. And when I feel
Mm-hmm,
fair
mm-hmm.
creature
Yes,
of an hour,
yes,
who
yeah.
who who is the fair creature of an hour? It
Right,
could be
probably, yeah,
anything.
the muse, right. Yeah.
That I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love. And so that's almost like a flow state, like a
Mm-hmm,
never
mm-hmm.
have
Yeah,
never have this un this this never have this ignorance of myself, in the
right,
flow. We
yeah.
want this through
Mm-hmm,
love.
mm-hmm,
Love
mm-hmm.
has this fairy power to make us
Yeah.
ignorant of ourselves in like a
Mm-hmm,
flow
mm-hmm.
state.
Yeah, because it's unreflective, you know.
Right,
I'm not reflecting on it. I'm not
right.
thinking about it. I'm not, considering it. I'm
And I
just
would
in it, you know.
have relish.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
the best part. The
Mm-hmm.
best part is when you can forget yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a fear that he'll never be able to. I mean, for anyone, I feel like any maybe young man has gone through this, right?
Mm,
If you've ever been up late at night, by yourself, or
right,
something like that. Maybe you looked up at the stars, maybe you looked up at the moon and you just thought, I'll never be able to do the things I think I want to do, in order to,
mm,
see my life realized, you know.
right.
Um, I feel like this poem kind of speaks to that.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been to this place, if you've been to this, to this flow state or this place of love, I think Most Def actually speaks to this in one of his songs on Black on Both Sides. It's like the third track. He's like, should I build monuments here in remembrance, of of this place of love, that he's at. What should I, this place where you close your eyes and um, what's he say? Close your eyes and I forget, but like, s- do something with your face. But
Mm,
it's just you know, we still I think for any young man, this would speak to who's kind of been in that place, who's had that moment of ecstasy and desired to try and capture it, and to hold on to it in some way. And there is a little bit of a fear, there is a little bit of insecurity that you may die before you get to do that, you know.
right. Or that you will be somehow unrealized. That life
Yep.
is, and
Yes.
also this poem is a bit modern in its idea that life is somehow in an experience. That life is
hmm
somehow
hmm
wrapped up in our experiences somehow.
Yeah. Or that it
And
could even be realized.
right, exactly. Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone. On the shore, on the outskirts, on the edge of the wide world between this world and death. I mean, this is a guy who died at 25.
hmm
Death was on
hmm
his mind. He knew he was going
Right.
to die for months before he
Yeah.
died. He knew he was
hmm
headed to death.
Yep.
This is one of this is a great line for loneliness. Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
till love and fame to nothingness do sink. That this evening's empire will return to sand,
hmm hmm Yeah.
and all of your San
Yeah.
Franciscos will fall
Yes.
and burn
Yes.
again.
Right.
You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
um, even after all that, I mean, this is another poem where Keats almost wants to have his cake and eat it too. I mean, when he fears that he may cease to be, he goes over everything that he's gonna miss. Everything from the books and his poems piled up like grain to that he'll never be able to chase the, he was just shitting on the high romance last time, but
Hmm.
now uh he'll never behold the symbols of high romance and live to trace them. And he'll never again hold that fairy power. But when it's all said and done, it might not have meant anything in anyway. Probably didn't even mean
Yeah,
anything anyway.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's trying to try and chase, kind of true love in a way. He wants to describe, true love. The trying to like almost trace the frontier of the mind, and of the spirit of the soul. Um, and I think that's, kind of in the last poem, Modern Love, he's sort of challenging the contemporary idea of love, the modern idea of love,
Right.
challenging it to a higher place. And here he's almost saying that, he's been to this higher place, and he has this desire to try and see it become realized, and he has these fears, these insecurities that he'll never be able to do that, that he
Mm.
almost can't measure up to it. Um, yeah, that's
But what about the last two lines? It's almost like he's is he admitting, kind of even begrudgingly, like what is he admitting in the last two lines? Is he admitting, like, what is he? What are the last two lines saying? Is life almost worth it, even after love and fame to nothingness do sink? Or are love and fame the efforts of life, and they to nothingness do sink?
I don't know. Gosh, I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe he kind of comes to a place of.
Or is he describing death of the wild world? I stand alone and think till I think he's thinking until love and fame to nothingness do sink.
I'm assuming he is probably contemplating death in that moment and saying
Right.
that, I guess nothing does matter. Yeah, or maybe none of it does matter. Um,
Mm,
and kind of comes to a place of maybe acceptance or something.
mm, yeah. Yeah, man. I really enjoyed this poem, and hey, as I too think, there's a song called by this group called Primitive Radio Gods. I can't think of the name of the song is it's a popular song. It was on that movie The Cable Guy. But
Mm,
there's a line in the song that says something like, "Can money pay for all the ways I can can money pays can money pay for all the days I stayed awake but half asleep?"
mm,
And it's like, don't count the days, make the days count. every
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
artist every artist feels like, oh, I'm wasting these
Right,
days.
right, right.
can
Yeah,
money can money pay for all the days I stayed awake but half asleep?
yeah. Something else this kind of reminds me of is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S.
Mm,
Eliot. Do I have the strength to roll the world into, to roll into an overwhelming question, to roll it into a ball of an overwhelming question? Yeah, can I roll the evening into a question? Do not ask what is it. Uh, it, it's almost like he's kind of trying to, you know sort of likewise sort of roll the world, roll love, roll it into, roll experience of it into something, into a book of high piled, character. Um,
mm,
yeah, that's kind of that's also something that I'm kind of sort of kind of taking from this. It's yeah, it's a rich poem. That's why he in his short time he sort of catapulted into the to the English canon.
When I have fears that I may cease to be. Oh,
Yep,
well, I guess I'll read it again,
I guess so.
and then we shall sign off. Read it again post analysis. When I have fears that I may cease to be by John Keats. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high pilot books and charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain, when I behold upon the night starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance, and when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. Man, it's beautiful, man. And I have fears that I may cease to be. What
All
a
right, John Keats.
what a what a pertinent fear, man. What a way to phrase it,
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
and I may cease to be.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's something that many people. I mean, I know many people could sort of relate to that.
Right.
That's but it was good. It was good going back and reading John Keats. I hadn't
Hmm.
kind of read him in a little while, and it was nice to go back and refresh and to learn a little bit more about him. And
I almost wish I
there's
could read more. I almost want to grab a book of his.
right,
I know
right.
his I could yeah, his complete works probably isn't that big.
It's a little thick. I remember getting it in the Columbus Library. And the funny thing is with that, I remember getting it. I remember turning it back in, and then like months before I moved from Columbus, they weren't letting me check out a book, and they said that I still had his book out, his complete books, his complete
Mm.
works. I don't have it. I paid the fine. It was like $25. It was ridiculous
Oh my
because
god.
it. Yeah, but I couldn't prove that I'd never turned it in or
Yeah.
that I didn't or that I did. But I was like, I don't have this book. I still don't have it. I wish I did. Columbus Library. I don't. I hope you guys found it because I don't have it.
It's the 13th, dude. The hardcover is $18. I might buy it. The complete poems of John Keats.
Definitely worth it.
Yeah, I might pick that
Yeah,
up.
he's a great one. He's an all timer. I
It
mean,
says he has an
of
epic
course.
poem here,
Yeah, yep, yep. And
Hyperion.
the Hyperion, yes.
Have you read that?
I think I might have attempted to when I was during the time, but
Mm,
I tried to read a couple of the epic poems from during that time, but I don't know that I if I did finish it or not.
mm.
I don't think I don't I don't quite I remember it, but I don't remember it. You know what I
Some
mean?
of those guys back in the day were writing.
Right?
Some
Yeah,
of those
yeah, I
epic
know.
poems you have
Uh,
to write. You have to
I
write
know that's what
those.
like when they talk about like novellas. Novella is like meant to be read in a sitting, and I'm like,
Mm,
it's 100. It's like 110 pages. I'm like,
right.
I'm I don't know what kind of time they had on their hands, but
Dude, a lot. Sounds like they had a
that might
lot,
take me
dude.
a week to read. I
Yeah.
might read that over 4 or 5 days. So, I'm not reading that
Exactly.
in a sitting.
No, no way.
I mean, the best I did was, I read like Old Man in the Sea in like 2 days. Even then,
Okay.
that's like a book that should have been read like I don't know in 4 hours or something like that. you know,
Well, some people, you know, they like, they do sit and just like tear through these books. I mean, I don't know.
right, right.
Not me. I
I
mean, and
mean,
plus sometimes I feel like and don't get me wrong, I have like sat and like read like a book, but I feel like I
mhm.
digest it better when I read like maybe chapter or two at a time.
Right, yeah, yeah. for sure.
Could just be me though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I just read Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Mm,
It's a novella. It's like 87 pages, but I probably read it over like 10 days, you know?
okay.
Um,
Right.
I read like I don't know how many pages, 10 or so pages like a day for, over 10 days like before bed. Um, I don't know, we have a I don't maybe we have like a different attention span, but who knows what these people would have been doing had they had social media, YouTube, all the we call them distractions that we have today. We take in
Right.
so much more information, kind of all the time that, makes it a little bit more difficult to really sit and focus on one for a period of time.
Right.
Yeah. Which makes some of these poems like hard to, kind of hard to read, just to be honest, like
Some
when
are a
they
bit
are,
difficult.
yeah, when they're, they can be kind of lengthy.
When it comes from something that's helped me when it comes to poetry from especially from like the 1800s, 1700s. Pay attention to the punctuation. Sort of like read to
Mm,
the punctuation. It'll kind of help
right.
you understand it a bit better, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when I first, when I was a neophyte in this, I would just read to the line. But
Same. Yeah.
you definitely want to pay
Yeah.
attention
So
to that
it
punctuation.
is, and that's another thing. I mean, even for like I think that kind of said it before on this podcast. You and I, we don't, we don't have any formal training.
Hmm.
We are not educators. We are not scholars. We are just, kind of, uh,
Amateurs.
yeah, amateurs, just common, we're of common stock. We're just reading these things. Um,
We are.
it's and I think for a lot of people, like us, people who just had public school education, had maybe a bachelor's degree or some college, and maybe not even specifically in, English or literature or anything like that. It's a skill to be able to learn how to read this stuff. It's
Mm.
even, learning kind of how to read it is, it's a little bit of a stepping stone.
It does take time.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's rewarding, nonetheless.
I think so.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. I've always enjoyed poetry. Especially
Hmm.
especially good poetry. I mean, we kind of have that luxury on this podcast. It's not like we're reading, you know, uh, not like we have anyone sending poetry in. We're reading a bunch of just random stuff. We are reading really the cream of the
Yeah,
crop.
right. Tried and true, century
Yeah,
tested.
yeah.
John Keats, he's writing the end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s. You know,
So
well regarded.
we're
Yeah,
kind of spoiled in that regard.
right. Yeah, exactly. This is yeah. This is nobody that like that is sort of unheard of. That
Right,
like he's not a household name, but like
right,
as far as this goes, I mean, that we're not really stepping out of the box. This is
right.
but yeah, but hey, next week we got you know Langston Hughes talk about I don't know stepping out of
Langston
the box, maybe not
Hughes.
stepping out of the box. I mean, he's pretty. He's
I don't
he's
know.
he's
Someone
he,
he
he's
might
close
be.
to a household name,
Yeah, he's close to a household name. Some would say Langston Hughes is in the box. He's very popular.
right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
He
yeah,
also
yeah.
could be seen as being out the box. So I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
It's gonna be
He-
great diving into him a
yeah.
bit.
Yeah. In the box is very much American culture. Outside of the box, the Harlem Renaissance is kind of seen as this like,
It's another. It's not the. It's
yeah,
almost like the beats. We're gonna have hints. We're
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
have
yeah,
hints. There's gonna be
yeah,
hints
yeah,
of counterculture.
right, yeah, yeah. It is like the Beats. That's a good, yeah. It's very much like the Beats. It's almost like it's like an East Coast urban, where like, the Beats were in like San Francisco, the Haight Ashbury,
Hmm.
and they were in New
They
York,
were in
like
Greenwich Village a bit, yeah.
yep, Greenwich Village, yep, Lower East Side,
But
but
this is
um,
gonna be it's gonna be a bit. It's gonna have some counterculture elements. We're also gonna have some of the
Hmm.
jazz elements.
Right,
The
right.
jazz and
Yep.
blues elements. But
Yeah. Which also, hey, the beats, Kerouac, he was with Steve Allen, that album that they did, he's
right.
very much all those he had those songs about, Duke Ellington and Dizzy Gillespie and so yeah, a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, so that will be sick as well. And yeah, I mean, hey, I thought this episode would be kind of short. Didn't have too
Mhm.
much to talk about up top, but the poetry kind of went on we kind of went on about, so it kind of about
Hey
an
man,
average episode.
when you have timeless subjects like John Keats, I mean, you can't help but go over.
He's definitely a solid poet, but
Right.
so well, I mean, I guess I don't really have anything else.
Yeah. I mean, hey, if you're done, all right,
I urge everyone to just go pick up his poetry and read it for yourself. Take it slow, no rush, really.
Mr. John Keats. One last thing though. It's funny. Some of this stuff can be so dressed up, some of this older, poetry, but it's really kind of contemporary. I think that's something that this episode we kind of talked about and kind of showed.
Yeah,
The
that
sentiment it remains.
people may express sentiments before, like years before they are almost writ large in the zeitgeist. You know,
Mm, hmm.
I do believe that there is a such thing as a zeitgeist, the sort of spirit of the times, but the spirit of just because everybody's on board doesn't mean no one thought of it before.
Right, right, right.
So,
Yep, yep. Yeah, so hey, John Keats,
John
you know,
Keats,
one for the ages. Hey,
first take.
a, a giant of poetry, standing at just 5 feet tall.
Hey, shout out to him, man, and shout out to our
Yep.
audience. And hey, we'll catch
Hmm.
you guys next
Yeah.
time.
Like, comment, subscribe.
I want you guys to go ahead and give that like button a bop.
Yep.
Give that
A
subscribe
heavy
button a bop.
elbow. Yep. Yep.
But take care,
Right.
guys. We'll see you later. Signing off.